Namaste! Welcome to Quick Wisdom with Bliss. My name is Bliss. Meow! And this is my cute little furball friend, Joy. Spirituality is everywhere. In the air we breathe, in nature all around us, and even written into our very DNA. We are energy, and together as energy, we're all connected. We're all one. United as one, we are here on the stage of life to love and help each other live the best we can. Now, I know you've come today to learn about a very special topic, so let's put on our fun caps and get started on this sacred exploration. This is Quick Wisdom with Bliss. Kundalini Yoga was established from Kundalini. It is believed to be energy that waits in a dormant state at the base of the spine until it's triggered by the practice of yoga. The energy is then channeled upward through the chakras as a means to achieve the process of spiritual perfection. Kundalini is thought to be power that is associated with the divine feminine. Girl power! Before we get into the yoga portion of today's subject, how about we talk a little more about Kundalini itself? Sound cool, Joy? Kundalini in Hinduism is thought to be a form of divine energy that's also known as Shakti. This energy stored at the base of the spine, also known as Muladhara, is prepared and stimulated through tantric practice. It is widely considered to lead the person practicing it to spiritual liberation. Kundalini is believed to be related to Paradevi or Adi Parashakti, who is the supreme being in Shaktism. It is also associated with the goddesses Kubjika and Bhairavi. The term itself, alongside the practices connected with it, was made a part of Hatha Yoga during the 11th century. Since then, it's been integrated into other kinds of Hinduism, and even New Age thought and modern spirituality. Kundalini and its concept is brought up in the Upanishads, which are a series of Hindu sacred treatises written in Sanskrit between the 9th and the 3rd centuries BEC, or before the current era. The Sanskrit adjective kundalin is defined as annular, circular, and it is mentioned as a noun for snake, specifically a coiled snake. In the 12th century Raja Tarangini Chronicle, which is a metrical, legendary, and historical chronicle of the northwestern Indian subcontinent, particularly the kings of Kashmir, Kunda, which is a noun meaning water pot or bowl, is found as the name of a Naga, which is a serpent deity, in one of the two major Sanskrit epics of an ancient India known as the Mahabharata. The use of the word Kundali as a name for a form of Shakti known as Goddess Durga is found frequently in Shaktism and Tantrism as early as the 11th century in a collection of mantras and instructions for the worship of various deities known as the Sarada Tilaka. It became a technical term in Hatha Yoga in the 15th century, and as a result, it was widely used in the Yoga Upanishads by the 16th century. Indian-born spiritual teacher, author, and translator Eknath Eswaran has paraphrased the term as meaning the coiled power, a force which usually just rests at the base of the spine, described as being coiled there like a serpent. Keeping up, Joy? Good girl, there's a lot more to learn. Wow! Isn't the world magical? It's always telling us something if we take the time to listen. Now, listen to this! Kundalini became a main concept in Saiva Tantra, mostly among the Sakta cults like the Koala. In these tantric traditions, Kundalini is known as the innate intelligence of embodied consciousness. The very first possible mention of the term was during the 8th century in the Tantra Sadbhava Tantra. However, other earlier tantras speak of seeing a representation of Shakti in the central channel and the upward movement of prana or vital force. This is frequently mentioned alongside Kundalini in later works. According to religious historian and author David Gordon White, this feminine spiritual force is also known as Bhogahavati, and that has a double meaning of both coiled and enjoyment. It signifies a strong feminine connection to bliss. Not me, but the feeling of bliss. Silly kitty. The feeling of pleasure, both the bliss of spiritual liberation, known as moksha, is the enjoyment of Shiva's sensual union with the goddess and creative activity. When talking about the influential Sakta tradition known as Kaula Kundalini, it is believed to be a latent, innate spiritual power that connects with the supreme goddess Kubjika, meaning the crooked one. Kubjika is made of pure bliss and power, also known as Shakti, and Shakti is the source of all mantras. Shakti lives within the 6 chakras across the central channel. When pertaining to Saiva Tantra, a lot of practices like bandhas, pranayama, tantric ritual, and mantra recitation were implemented as a way to wake this spiritual power up so that it could create a state of spiritual liberation and bliss. Now that we know what that is, how about we talk about the experiences brought about by Kundalini? Yogis like Muktananda think that Kundalini can be triggered or Shaktipat, which is the spiritual transmission by a teacher or guru, or by spiritual practices like meditation or yoga. The American comparative religion scholar Joseph Campbell details the concept of Kundalini as the figure of a coiled female serpent, a serpent goddess not of gross but subtle substance, which is to be thought of as residing in a torpid, slumbering state in a subtle center. The first of the 7, near the base of the spine, the aim of the yoga then being to rouse the serpent, lift her head and bring her up in a subtle nerve or channel of the spine to the so-called 1,000-petaled lotus, Sahasrara. At the crown of the head, she, rising from the lowest to the highest lotus center, will pass through and wake the 5 between, and with each waking, the psychology and personality of the practitioner will be altogether and fundamentally transformed. Western recognition of Kundalini was reinforced by the interest a Swiss psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, Dr. Carl Jung, who lived from the year 1875 until 1961. The 1932 presentation that Jung gave on Kundalini Yoga to Zurich's Psychological Club is thought to be a milestone of the symbolic transformations of inner experience, as well as in the psychological understanding of Eastern thought. Kundalini Yoga enabled Jung to have a model for the development of higher consciousness. Jung interpreted its symbols of individualization with a newfound sensitivity towards a fresh generation's interest in psychological exploration and alternative religions. During his introduction to Jung's book, The Psychology of Kundalini Yoga, London-based author, editor, and professor at University College London, Sonu Shamdasani, wrote, "The emergence of depth psychology was historically paralleled by the translation and widespread dissemination of the texts of yoga. For the depth psychology sought to liberate themselves from the stultifying limitations of Western thought to develop maps of inner experience grounded in the transformative potential of the therapeutic practices. A similar alignment of theory and practice seemed to be embodied in the yogic texts that moreover had developed independently of the bindings of Western thought." What do you think about that, Joy? You're so cute, Joy. I love you. Sorry, lost in cuteness. Let's continue. Further, the initiatory structure adopted by institutions of psychotherapy brought its social organization into proximity with that of yoga. Hence, an opportunity for a new form of comparative psychology opened up. According to Jung, who also founded analytical psychology, the concept of Kundalini has for us only one use, that is, to describe our own experiences with the unconscious. Jung employed the Kundalini system symbolically as a way to understand the dynamic movement between unconscious and conscious processes. Jung warned that all forms of yoga that are implemented by Westerners can be thought of as trying to dominate the body and the unconscious through the ideal of moving upwards towards higher chakras. London-based author, editor, and professor at University College London, Sonu Shamdasani, is of the belief that Jung thought that the symbolism of Kundalini Yoga indicated that the bizarre symptomatology that patients at times showed actually resulted from the awakening of their Kundalini. Jung contended that knowledge of such symbolism made much that would usually be seen as the meaningless byproducts of a disease process to be perceived as deeply meaningful symbolic processes, and explains the frequent strange physical localizations of symptoms. The popularity of Eastern spiritual practices have been linked with psychological problems in the West. Psychiatric literature says that since the influx of Eastern spiritual practices and the rising popularity of meditation starting in the 1960s, many people have experienced a variety of psychological difficulties, either while engaged in intensive spiritual practice or spontaneously. Researchers in the field of near-death studies at the transpersonal psychology have detailed a complex pattern of motor, sensory, affective, and mental systems that can at times be linked with the concept of Kundalini. They sometimes call this affliction the Kundalini syndrome. The difference between the spiritual emergency that is associated with the Kundalini awakening can be viewed as an acutely psychotic episode by some psychiatrists who aren't versed in the culture. The biological changes of increased P300 amplitudes, which are thought to reflect processes involved in stimulus evaluation or categorization that happens with specific yogic practices, can lead to extreme psychosis. The biological changes that come by using yogic techniques can be used to warn people about these types of reactions. That's right, Joy. As with anything, you have to be careful. A man named Sir John Woodroffe lived from the year 1865 until 1936, was also known by his pseudonym Arthur Avalon. He was a British Orientalist whose books ignited a global interest in yogic practices and Hindu philosophy. While he was serving in Calcutta as a High Court judge, Woodroffe studied Hindu philosophy and Sanskrit and how it relates to Hindu Tantra. Woodroffe has lectured on yoga, tantra, and Indian philosophy, as well as translated many of the original Sanskrit texts. His published work, The Serpent Power, The Secrets of Tantric and Shaktic Yoga, has become one of the leading sources for a vast amount of modern Western domestications of the practice of Kundalini Yoga. His book presents a philosophically and academically sophisticated translation of and commentary work on two key Eastern texts, Shat Chakra Nirupana, which translates to Description and Investigation into the Six Bodily Centers, written by Tantric Purnananda Swami in the year 1526, and the Paduka Pankaka from the Sanskrit of a commentary by Kalicharana, which translates to Fivefold Footstool of the Guru. Kundalini Shakti is a Sanskrit term that translates to serpent power. Joy, are you ready to learn more? That's what I thought. Here we go. Blessings of knowledge. Let these facts heal us with understanding. Kundalini is believed to be an energy that can be released within a person who is using a specific set of meditation techniques. Kundalini Shakti is symbolically represented as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. German anthologist and linguistic and historian of South Asian art, Heinrich Zimmer praised Woodruff's writings in his book, Artistic Form and Yoga and the Sacred Images of India. Zimmer stated that the values of the Hindu tradition were disclosed to me through the enormous life work of Sir John Woodruff, alias Arthur Avalon, a pioneer and a classic author in Indic studies, second to none, who for the first time by many publications and books made available the extensive and complex treasure of late Hindu tradition, the Tantras. A period as grand and rich as the Vedas, the epic, Puranas, etc., the latest crystallization of Indian wisdom, the indispensable closing link of a chain, affording keys to countless problems in the history of Buddhism and Hinduism, in mythology and symbolism. Woodruff later clarified his objective after the warm reception that his work had received by stating that, "All the world, I speak of course of those interested in such subjects, is beginning to speak of Kundalini Shakti." He described his intention as follows: "We, who are foreigners, must place ourselves in the skin of the Hindu and must look at their doctrine and ritual through their eyes and not our own." An American writer named William Buhlman started work on an international survey regarding out-of-body experiences, also known as OBEs for short, in the year 1969. Buhlman's objective was to collect information regarding the symptoms of OBEs like vibrations, sounds, and other various types of phenomena that usually happen during an OBE event. Buhlman's main area of interest was to compare his findings with the reports that were made by yogis like Gopi Krishna. Over the years, many yogis have referenced phenomenon like the vibrational state as parts of their Kundalini-related spiritual experience. Buhlman explains, "There are numerous reports of full Kundalini experiences culminating with a transcendental out-of-body state of consciousness. In fact, many people consider this experience to be the ultimate path to enlightenment." The basic premise is to encourage the flow of Kundalini energy up the spine and toward the top of the head, the crown chakra, thus projecting your awareness into the higher heavenly dimensions of the universe. The result is an indescribable expansion of consciousness into spiritual realms beyond form and thought. Okay, Joy, now that we've covered what Kundalini is, let's talk more about the yoga practices of it. Kundalini Yoga is a school of yoga that is heavily influenced by the Tantra and Shaktism schools of Hinduism. It gets its name through a focus on awakening Kundalini energy through regular practice of mantra, tantra, yantra, yoga, or meditation. Kundalini Yoga is frequently believed to be the most dangerous kind of yoga because of its involvement of subtle energies. In the 20th century, Kundalini Yoga has become a technical term specific to this tradition, but it is actually a synthesis of the changing and devotion of Bhakti Yoga, its meditation-based Raja Yoga, and the expression of power and energy, Shakti Yoga. Yet it may also include Hatha Yoga methods such as Pranayama, Asana Bandha, Patanjali's Kriya Yoga that consists of self-discipline, self-study, and devotion to God, tantric visualization and meditation techniques of Laya Yoga that is known as Samskitas, alongside other techniques oriented towards the awakening of Kundalini. That is quick wisdom if you ask me. What do you think, Joy? Well said, Joy. I couldn't agree with you more. Now, are you ready to get deeper into this? Okay then. A Sanskrit text on yoga that was written by an unknown author called the Shiva Samhita describes a qualified yogi as practicer of the 4 yogas as means to experience Kundalini awakening. However, lesser students may only try and master one technique or another. The order of the yogas are as follows: Mantra Yoga, Hatha Yoga, Laya Yoga, and Raja Yoga. Now, I mentioned Hatha Yoga. Let's take a closer look at what that is. The Yoga Kundalini Upanishad is listed in the Muktika canon of 108 Upanishads. Since this canon was fixed in the year 1656, it is believed that the Yoga Kundalini Upanishad was gathered together in the first half of the 17th century at the latest. The Upanishad most likely dates back to the 16th century, just like other Sanskrit texts which describe Kundalini as a technical term in Tantric Yoga like the Satkakra Nirupana and the Paduka Pankaka. These latter texts were translated in the year 1919 by John Woodruff as The Serpent Power, The Secrets of Tantric and Shaktic Yoga. Woodruff identifies the process of involution and its techniques in these texts as a particular form of Tantric Laya Yoga. The Yoga Tattva and the Yoga Kundali are yoga texts related to the school of Hatha Yoga and Mantra Yoga. They're part of a tendency of syncretism, which is defined as the amalgamation of different religions, cultures, or schools of thought. The Yoga Kundalini Upanishad are made up of 3 short chapters. It starts by stating that Chitta, which means consciousness, is controlled by prana and it is controlled by postures, moderate food, and Shakti Chala. Verses 1.6 describe the concepts of moderate food, and verse 1.7 introduces Kundalini as the name of the Shakti under discussion. 1.7, the Shakti, which I mentioned earlier, is only Kundalini. A wise man should take it up from its place to the middle of the eyebrows. This is called Shakti Chala. 1.8. In practicing it, 2 things are necessary: Sarasvati Chalana and the restraint of prana, also known as breath. Then through practice, Kundalini, which is a spiral, becomes straightened. Now, Joy, here's what I've been waiting to talk about: the modern uses. Although Kundalini became a part of Tantra that you can find side by side with Hatha Yoga through a process of syncretism, a Sadguru, Hindu yogi guru, and mystic well known in Eastern India named Swami Nigamananda taught a kind of Laya Yoga that he argued wasn't part of Hatha Yoga. Sivananda Saraswati was a Hindu spiritual teacher and an advocate of yoga and Vedanta. He introduced many readers to Kundalini Yoga with his book on the subject that was published in the year 1935. This book contains in-depth details about Kundalini Yoga and combines Laya teachings from older sources, including the Hatha Pradipika and Satkakra Nirupana. Combined alongside other currents of Neo-Hinduism and Hindu revivalism, Kundalini Yoga became extremely popular in Western counterculture, mostly during the 60s until the 80s. One of the more important figures in Kundalini Yoga is Yogi Bhajan. Back in the year 1968, Yogi Bhajan, also known as Harbhajan Singh Khalsa, established his own brand of Kundalini Yoga in the United States of America. Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. Bhajan created the Healthy, Happy, Holy organization as an organization that would instruct its students and followers. Bhajan took yogic techniques and postures and then attached them to Sikh mantras and tantric theories that ended up synthesizing a brand new type of Kundalini Yoga. Yoga historian Philip Disleep once wrote, "When placed alongside the teachings of Swami Dhirendranath Brahmachari and Maharaj Virsa Singh, it becomes strikingly apparent that at least in its earliest years, Yogi Bhajan's Kundalini Yoga was not a distinct practice, but essentially a combination of yogic mechanics learned from the former and the Sikh-derived mantras such as Ik Ongkar, Satnam, Sri Waheguru, and chanting from the latter. However, a man named Virsa Singh, who's considered a holy person of biblical proportions by many, has rejected Bhajan's Kundalini Yoga. Singh believes that yoga wasn't a part of the Gobind Sadhan, which is a path that is rooted in the Sikh tradition and the universal teachings of its gurus. This has ignited a bit of a power struggle over the control of the new American followers. These fun facts fill my heart with happiness. I love learning, don't you? I hope these spiritual concepts are becoming clear. Let's keep learning. Traditional Sikhs use quotations by an influential Sikh figure, writer, historian, and preacher named Bhai Gurdas, whose Vara or ballads were considered by Guru Arjan the first of the 2 gurus martyred in the Sikh faith and the 5th of the 10 total Sikh gurus as a key to understanding the concepts of the Guru Granth Sahib, which is the central religious scripture of Sikhism, regarded by Sikhs as the final, sovereign, and eternal living guru following the lineage of 10 human gurus of the religion, as saying, wherever the founder of Sikhism and the first of the 10 Sikh gurus, Guru Nanak, went and argued the futility of yoga, the yogis gave up their yogic paths. Followers of the Yogi Bhajan believe that while yoga practice and philosophy are usually thought of to be a part of Hindu culture, Kundalini Yoga, as taught by Yogi Bhajan, is established on the concepts of Sikh Dharma. Kundalini Yoga, as instructed by Yogi Bhajan, sticks to the 3 pillars of Patanjali's Kriya Yoga system. Discipline, also known as tapa, spiritual study, also known as svadhyaya, and devotion to God, also known as Isvara Pranidhana. But it frowns upon extremes of renunciation and self-discipline. Yogi Bhajan encouraged his students to establish businesses, marry, and be completely engaged in society. Instead of worshiping God, Yogi Bhajan's ideology encouraged students to enhance their mind as a means to experience God. Yogi Bhajan sometimes called the Sikh lifestyle as Raja Yoga, which means it's the yoga of living detached but fully engaged in the world. In respect of the rigor of his ideologies, Yogi Bhajan has a true kinship with the other 20th century Sikh sadhu saints, like Sant Baba Nand Singh Ji, Bhai Randhir Singh, and Sant Baba Atar Singh. Yogi Bhajan's version of Kundalini Yoga has grown in influence and popularity, especially in Europe, the Americas, South Africa, Australia, East Asia, and Togo, thanks in part to the training of thousands of teachers. It has become through videos and book research by Dharma Singh Khalsa, Satbir Singh Khalsa, David Shannonhoff Khalsa, and others, teachers like Gurmukh Kaur Khalsa, and also through the publicity it attained from various celebrities such as Demi Moore, Madonna, Cindy Crawford, David Duchovny, Al Pacino, Miranda Kerr, and Russell Brand, who have been known or are known to practice it. One article from 2013 in a New York wellness magazine called Kundalini Yoga, the ultra-spiritual yoga celebs love. Yogi Bhajan said that Kundalini Yoga consists of active and passive asana-based kriyas, pranayama, and meditations, which target the whole body system, nervous system, glands, mental faculties, chakras, to develop awareness, consciousness, and spiritual strength. We're almost finished, Joy! Wasn't that fun? Before we go, let's quickly dive into the principles of Kundalini Yoga. As you know, Kundalini is the term for a spiritual energy or feminine life force located at the base of the spine that has been referred to as coiled up as a serpent. The practice of Kundalini Yoga is believed to have the power to awaken the sleeping Kundalini Shakti from its coiled base through the 6 chakras and penetrate the 7th chakra or crown. This energy is said to travel along the Ida, also known as the left Pingala, which is also known as the right and central, or Sushumna Nadi, the main channels of pranic energy in the body. A recent article has suggested that the process may be mediated by the vagus nerve. Wow, I can feel my spirit evolving as we learn all this new and important information. And there's more! Kundalini energy is technically explained as being sparked during yogic breathing when prana and apana blends at the third chakra, the navel center, at which point it initially drops down to the first and second chakras before traveling up to the spine to the higher centers of the brain to activate the golden cord, the connection between the pituitary and pineal glands, and penetrates the 7 chakras. Borrowing and integrating many different approaches, Kundalini Yoga can be understood as a trifold approach of Bhakti Yoga for devotion, Shakti Yoga for power, and Raja Yoga for mental power and control. Its purpose through the daily practice of kriyas and meditation and sadhana are described as a practical technology of human consciousness for humans to achieve their total creative potential. With the practice of Kundalini Yoga, one is thought able to liberate oneself from one's karma and to realize one's dharma or life purpose. The practice of kriyas and meditations in Kundalini Yoga are designed to raise complete body awareness to prepare the body, nervous system, and mind to handle the energy of Kundalini rising. The majority of the physical postures focus on navel activity, activity of the spine, and selective pressurization of body points and meridians. Breath work and the application of bandhas, which are the 3 yogic locks, aid to release, direct, and control the flow of Kundalini energy from the lower centers to the higher energetic centers. Along with the many kriyas, meditations, and practices of Kundalini Yoga, a simple breathing technique of alternate nostril breathing is taught as a method to cleanse the nadis, or subtle channels and pathways, to help awaken Kundalini energy. In 1998, a practitioner of Kundalini Yoga for 24 years and director of 2 psychotherapy clinics in the San Francisco Bay Area named Stuart Savatsky adapted a developmental and evolutionary perspective in his interpretation of Kundalini Yoga. That is, he interprets Kundalini Yoga as a catalyst for psycho-spiritual growth and bodily maturation. According to this interpretation of yoga, the body bows itself into greater maturation, none of which should be considered mere stretching exercises. That's right, Joy! The main gist of things for everyone to realize is that if you're going to practice Kundalini Yoga, you need to be aware of the benefits as well as the possible dangers. No one wants to get hurt, and happiness is always on the menu here at Quick Wisdom with Bliss. Thanks for hanging out with us. Until the next Quick Wisdom with Bliss, namaste! Now that's Quick Wisdom with Bliss, and that wraps up our learning for today's fascinating subject. I hope your spirit has grown as much as mine has. Please come see me anytime to discuss more spiritual ideas and heart-fulfilling concepts. What was that, Joy? You don't want them to leave? Aw, neither do I. Well, they can stay if they want to. Now, let's meditate on our next adventure. Om